And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Two Guys in the Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. My name is Don K. Preston, and boy, am I glad to be with you. I'll say more about that in just a moment. I am here as usual with Daniel Rogers. Daniel, good to see you. Hope you
Good,
had a good day.
pretty good day. It's beautiful outside here. High 60s.
Uh,
So it was great. We went on a walk and had a blast.
yeah. Well, it's been in the mid 40s here all day long and raining with a north wind of about 4,000 miles an hour. I mean,
Oh
it's
man.
just it's been pretty nasty. It really has.
Yeah.
But we needed the rain so badly. It's just been terrible how low our ponds are, how low the lakes are. So it's a very needed bit of rain that we're getting. And it's not near enough, but at least it helps a little bit the dryness, cut down on the fire risk and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend from Colorado and he was saying some of the same stuff that he's hoping that this snowfall that they've got is going to help out their water levels too. But anyways, yeah, it was beautiful outside today. I walked down to the post office from the church building, which is probably a mile round trip or so, and then walked around the block with the family a few moments ago to enjoy the cool evening air. And now I get
Yeah.
to be here with you. I was worried. I was worried from what you were saying that you weren't going to be here.
Well, as I shared with you off air and a while ago, yesterday and today has been extremely frustrating for me, technologically speaking. In the midst of all of my other struggles of trying to get my manuscript ready for publication, that it's been ready now for 6 months, and unfortunately had conversion issues, formatting issues in conversion from my Word Perfect. No comments, please, about Word Perfect. And uh, but when I would try to convert it either to PDF or to Microsoft Word, um, it would insert tremendous numbers of widows and orphans. It would insert blank pages. It would insert random spacings. And it was just an absolute mess. Uh, and I didn't know how to overcome it. I've got Adobe that allows me to edit, but I'm not proficient at it in Adobe. It to me, Adobe's editing process is a little bit convoluted,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, I tried to get that done. It didn't work. And I finally put out an appeal. I made a comment on one of my YouTube videos recently that I needed some help, really needed some help, and had a couple of individuals respond.
Good.
And one fella, he said, I'm not really what you call a professional, but I'm really good. And so he did manage to get it converted into Microsoft Word. Now, it's still, even though it was exponentially better than what I had done, still had some issues. So I've spent the last couple of days removing arbitrary spacings, um, getting rid of orphans and widows, repaginating my table of contents,
You
things
better
like that.
explain what orphans and widows are.
Well,
As people
yeah,
get Don Preston gets rid of orphans and widows.
yeah, exactly right. I thought you were supposed to love orphans and widows. Well, in journalism and in writing, when you come to the bottom of the page, you're not supposed to leave like just a single line, and certainly not just a single word or two at the top of a page. You're supposed to have two or three lines all together. Now, in my Word Perfect program, it has a feature that says keep text together, and you can designate however many lines you want to keep from dangling, as it were,
Yeah.
or being divided. And so that's extremely helpful, but that doesn't translate into Word.
Mm,
Word doesn't recognize that.
yeah.
And so I've been having to go into that converted document and manually hit enter enough to move down lines to where I don't have widows and orphans. Widows, uh, I believe widows at the top of the page, orphan is at the bottom of the page. And then they've got another term, I've forgotten exactly what it is, but it's for a single word or two at the top of a page or at the bottom of a page. So I've been doing all of that, ultra time consuming. I mean, from 3 o'clock in the morning until whoever knows how long of a night. I've just been putting in countless hours in it, but I've just, knock on wood, as the saying goes, I'm really close to sending it off to my friend Tom Klosky over in Arkansas, who is generating my indices for me. He had already gotten them almost done. Well, now with the conversion, all the pagination is wrong. So guess what?
He's got to do it again.
He's got to do it again. Yeah. So that's what I've been doing the last couple of days.
That's no good. Yeah. That's
no
good.
It's not. And the trouble of it is, I say the trouble, it may be a good thing. I have another book almost finished. I'm in the process of generating my table of contents right now. And I'm probably going to appeal to a certain Mr. Daniel Rogers to do my scripture index on it if he's got the time.
Right.
But it's only going to be about 175, 185, maybe 200 pages long.
So that's about 4,000 scripture references, knowing you.
Well, we hope, yeah. But the good thing about it is I've already converted it into Word, and I've already converted it to PDF, and it went seamlessly. The problem with my large book was it's 458 pages.
Yeah.
And Microsoft Word does not like large documents at all.
Yeah.
It's something that I discovered some time ago. And so, the fact that this is a smaller document, like I said, just as an experiment the other day, I did a conversion into PDF, just seamless, just beautiful. And then it will convert that over into Word seamlessly. So, I'm closing in on that real quickly. Lord willing, another couple of months at the most, it will be finished.
Very good. Wow, so cool. 2 more books coming out then pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, I've been hard at work. I can assure you that.
Yes,
really have.
Yeah, same here. I think I've told you I'm moving into the full-time preaching position here, and that's going to include taking on a couple of different Bible classes as well during the week and on Sunday morning, and some other duties as well. So I've already started engaging in those, which has just been, I've got a lot going on too.
Yeah, you do.
I'm worn
out. Yeah, when you got 2 kids,
yes,
wife, and all of those ministerial duties, yeah, believe you me, I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And it does keep a person busy. It really does.
Yeah, people who think that ministers only work on Sunday don't know any ministers. It's a 24/7 gig a lot of the time.
It really is.
And I'm taking 4 classes to finish out my schooling, my BA, by this May. So,
oh wow,
I've got my lowest grade is a 99.58 or something. So,
well, you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
I was so mad when I missed. It was one. It was one quiz question that I missed. I was so angry. But there's nothing I can do about it. So just gotta make 100s on everything, so it's 99.99, and maybe he'll give me some bonus work so I can bump it up to 100.
I'll never forget when I was in preacher school, our professor, he was known for never giving perfect scores, no matter what you did on the final test. And invariably, the final test, and I'm not exaggerating, the final test was 600 questions long.
Whoa.
And it was on the book of Genesis.
Wow.
Well, I aced him. I answered every question accurately. So he gets up when he's handing out the scores and he said, I just want to say something here. I have never had a single person score perfectly on all 600 questions, but Brother Don Preston did. However, I don't believe in giving perfect scores. He misspelled one word, and we're knocking off a full point for one misspelled word in an essay question.
In a handwritten essay question.
In a handwritten essay question.
You didn't have your stone tablets didn't have spell check when you.
No. Sure enough.
Yeah. Well, did you write it in WordPerfect?
No. Okay. No, that was literally write this thing out. I mean, it took his test took 1 day. He gave us 1 day to take it. So we came into class. He gave us the test form and said, you got all day long to fix it. You know, we'll take breaks every once in a while. We'll take a lunch break. We'll come back, and you got all day to answer it. Okay, that's fine. And there were still some guys that almost failed it.
Wow.
And you're going, okay, you had all these breaks, had an opportunity to go to Genesis, do a little reading,
Yeah.
Do a little bit of brush up. You got lunch.
Professor, I read the Bible during my lunch break every day, and I just happen to be in Genesis. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I have to.
There you go.
It, you know?
Yeah. So anyway, thanks for being with us, folks. We do appreciate you being with us here on Two Guys and a Bible. And we want to continue our discussion. Now, remember, we have been focused on the Messianic temple, and we've been focused on Isaiah 65. Now, I need to offer just a little bit of a caveat, if you want to call it a caveat. But when we're talking about the Messianic temple in Isaiah 65, I understand that there are probably some dispensationalists that are out there going, oh, no, you do not understand. Isaiah 65 is the new heaven and new earth at the end of the millennium. The Messianic temple is constructed at the beginning of the millennium. I'm well aware of that. I've read the literature. I know exactly what the dispensationalists believe in that regard. However, here's a strange thing. John Walvoord did it. Dwight Pentecost did it. Other noted dispensational authors did it. And that is, they go to Isaiah 65 and they arbitrarily go to this verse. This verse is the millennium. This verse is the end of the millennium. And so you've got this really, really weird, and I mean no offense, but you got this really, really weird hermeneutic going on, pardon me, that says, okay, the Lord in this verse is talking about the beginning of the millennium. But in the period at the end of that one verse, the Lord changes subjects. Now he's talking about the end of the millennium, 1,000 years later. And then at the end of that verse, he reverts back to a discussion of the millennium. There is absolutely no consistency in the dispensational hermeneutic when it comes to Isaiah 65 and the subject of the millennium, the temple, or the new heaven, new earth. It's as arbitrary and as capricious as anything could possibly be. As I've read the literature down through the years, I've literally sat going, whoa, wait a minute. Where's this change of subject? Because grammatically, as you read all of the English translations, you don't get any idea of a shift or a change in subject at all. And so to try to follow the dispensational hermeneutic in this regard, it's almost impossible. You just have to take that particular writer or that particular speaker's word for it, because he's not going to give you any reason for it. Not going to give you any exegesis of the Hebrew. He's not going to tell you, okay, now in the Hebrew construction, this demands a change of subject. No. They don't even attempt to do that. It's just like, okay, this is Messianic temple in the new heaven, in the millennium. Okay, next verse. This is at the end of the millennium and the destruction of literal creation. And you're just left wondering, where did they come up with this? How do they justify this? So, with that background, as we enter back into the text, one of the things that the dispensationalists, I have no recollection, let me put it that way. I have no recollection of reading a single dispensational writer who ever gave note or acknowledged the theme of the filling up of the measure of sin that we began a discussion of, 2 weeks ago, Daniel?
Yeah, I think it's about 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 2 weeks ago. Again, I don't remember ever reading a single dispensational author who even took note of that Now you've got Edward Young, who, as I remember it, was an amillennialist. I think that's correct. Uh, but he doesn't even mention it other than acknowledging that Isaiah chapter 65 does talk about the concept of filling up the measure of sin. But extremely, extremely few commentators that I have read ever say, okay, here we've got the doctrine of the filling up the measure of sin. Look how much Jesus talked about that subject. They just don't. And that's remarkable.
Yeah, because once you trace the filling up of the measure of sin, it takes care of a lot of uh, dividing passages arbitrarily, like Matthew 24 and 25, for instance. Revelation as well. You can't say this is fall of Jerusalem, this is end of time, or this is you know, the recreation of earth or whatever, because following that path of the vindication of the martyrs brings all these passages together and puts them under the same heading. You don't have multiple vindications of the martyrs. If all the blood of all the martyrs all the way back to Abel would be brought upon that generation, as Jesus said in Matthew 23, then there's no need for any more vindication past that for the martyrs specifically of the Old Testament saints. There's no need for any more vindication. So to me, that subject puts all these passages together, and an absence of recognizing that in these commentaries that you're alluding to, and then arbitrarily splitting up the passage, is kind of telling to me, at least. Either that they're ignorant of the of that theme in that passage, or they haven't considered it and regards to that specific text, or maybe subconsciously they've ran over it, not because of the implications. And we've all done that before, of course. Oh, yeah. Do you remember teaching Bible class sometime, Don? And it wouldn't be a controversial passage, it would just be a weird passage, and you just read through that section real quick, and now we're on this verse over here. I've done it. We've all done it, but because the Bible is a complicated book. But that doesn't excuse not addressing it when it's brought up, by your brother in Christ, right?
And a prime example of what you're saying, I was sitting here thinking years ago, and just a word here, Jim McGuigan was always he's a minister in the Church of Christ, Irish guy. I absolutely used to love to read his writings. I don't know what happened to Jim. I haven't heard anything about him for years now. I don't know if he passed away. I don't know if he moved back to Ireland. I really don't know what happened to him, because, like I said, I haven't even heard his name mentioned in literally years. But nonetheless, Jim McGuigan was a man. I've got some of his commentaries. I've got his commentary on Daniel, got his commentary on Isaiah, and he got his commentary on Revelation. Well, and I don't know if he wrote any others. When I was researching to do my book on Revelation entitled "Who Is This Babylon?", I was naturally studying the subject of the vindication of the martyrs. Now, remember, folks, Isaiah chapter 65, the Lord said, "Your sins and the sins of your fathers will a measure into your bosom." Well, numerous scholars acknowledge that that's the doctrine of filling up the measure of sin. Well, the filling up of the measure of sin demands vindication for that sin, vindication for the specific sin of killing the saints. Well, so I was doing my research. I was reading the different commentaries on the vindication of the martyrs. And I picked up Jim's book because, like I said, always appreciated him. I always thought he was very thoughtful. I thought he was well read. He was well read. But a good example, Jim McGuigan is a prime example of how we as human beings, and you said it there a moment ago, we can gloss right over things that may have a profound impact on our paradigm, but number one, we may not be ready to deal with it at that time, or we may not see the implications of it at that time. Okay, so in Revelation chapter 16, of course, it talks about this great city Babylon had slain the prophets. And in Revelation 17, it talks about this great city having a cup full of the blood of the martyrs. And Jim McGuigan, in his commentary, made the comment. He said, it is a well known fact of how bloody the Romans were. It has been estimated that the Romans killed over 4 million people. And I'll never forget reading that and literally going, what's the point? Those 4 million people were not Christian martyrs. And Revelation chapter 17, 6 and following is about Babylon having a cup in her hand that is full of the blood of the saints and of the martyrs of Christ. So here is Jim McGuigan, great guy, wonderful servant attitude, very, very humble guy. I used to love to hear him preach. So here's this wonderful guy, and he comes to Revelation chapter 17 that specifically identifies who these martyrs are. They're not people who have died in the Roman wars. They are not people who would die in World War I or World War II or Vietnam or whatever. It has nothing to do with those conflicts. It is those who had suffered for the cause of Christ. They are those related to Revelation chapter 6. I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been beheaded for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. That's who this is about. And for Jim McGuigan to completely ignore that delimiting qualification and identifying qualification, and to just simply talk about, boy, look at all the people Rome killed. That's totally irrelevant. It's not political martyrs. It's religious martyrs of the followers of Christ. But you find that kind, you find that kind of false hermeneutic and bad exegesis in commentary after commentary after commentary. G.K. Beale, one of the finest amillennial scholars in the world, noted as one of the greatest Greek scholars in the world. I mean, his commentary on Revelations, sitting right over there, it's that thick. And over and over and over in the book, he talks about the blood of all of God's saints. And you go, okay, stay with that theme. Stay with that theme. And he says that one of these days, all of that blood will be avenged. And you're going, well, Jesus said it would be avenged in his generation. He completely, totally ignores that concept. Now, keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, since we're on the Messianic temple, let's talk about the first century temple. Stephen, standing in that temple, which was the epicenter of their world, said to the Jews surrounding him, which of the prophets have you not slain? Now, I don't think it's purely coincidence that he's standing in the temple making that accusation, because it was the Sanhedrin that was housed in the temple that authorized, and they were the motivators of the persecution of the martyrs. So again, I don't think it's anything to do with coincidence that he was standing in the temple making that accusation against the leaders of the temple.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, you're absolutely right about the nature of the martyrs. The martyrs have to be Christian martyrs, not just political martyrs, and going to Stephen in Acts chapter 7 again locates the one guilty for killing these martyrs, as Peter had said in Acts chapter 4 and Acts chapter 5, whenever they were arrested and then tried multiple times. Remember, he pointed at them and he said, "This stone has been rejected by you, the builders." And that's the story throughout Acts. In Acts chapter 2, in Acts chapter 3, it's always you have taken with wicked hands have slain Jesus the Christ. And so when Stephen stands up and says that you have, which of the prophets have you not murdered? And then he goes right after that and cites Isaiah, citing Isaiah 66 in the same chapter. You can't help but think that he has in mind this very passage that's under consideration this evening from Isaiah 65. And you wonder, with the force of that, how so many people have missed that connection in developing that theme. It's the same message throughout Luke and Acts of who the martyrs were and who was guilty of killing them. From Jesus in, was it Luke 13? It's not possible for a prophet to perish outside of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. All the way through the end of Acts in chapter 28, when Paul cites Isaiah chapter 6 to basically, condemn them for not listening and not hearing and not having ears to hear, what happens when the people don't have ears to hear? Yep. They persecute the prophets. That's what happened to Jeremiah. That's what happened to Zechariah and all these others. So I think that you're spot on there in appealing to Stephen, and I don't see why this subject isn't talked about more in prophetic circles. Why have so many missed this when Jesus, so clearly we can talk about the nature of the resurrection, we can talk about the nature of the new heavens, new earth, but the vindication of the martyrs is probably one of the most plain teachings in the Gospels and Acts. So, yeah, I think you're on the right track there for sure.
Well, as I mentioned to you, and we're both very familiar with Sam Dawson's really excellent book on the book of Revelation and the vindication of the martyrs that begins. The promise of it begins in Genesis chapter 4. The blood of Abel, your brother, cries out to me from the ground. And that is God saying, guess what? I'm going to vindicate that blood one of these days. And all throughout the book of Psalms, for instance, we find the cry echoed in Revelation 6:9-11, but we find that the cry in the book of Psalms over and over and over again, how long, O Lord? Yeah. And that cry was made by his servants being oppressed, being persecuted, the righteous being persecuted by the wicked of the nation, generally speaking, not necessarily even by pagan nations, but being persecuted by their own brethren within the nation, because here they are. And by the way, that's exactly what we find in Isaiah 66 that we will get to in our study, because boy, is Isaiah 66 critical for an understanding of the Messianic temple as standing opposed to the Old Covenant temple. And by the way, let me throw this out there. For those of you who may not know, I recently wrote a book and introduced it entitled Temple to Telos. And the point of that book was that the Jerusalem temple was standing, and the temple cultus, that is the sacrificial days, the feast days, the new moons, the Sabbaths, those were all valid and binding and would continue to be binding until the time of Reformation. Now, that's extremely critical. What it meant was that the Old Covenant cultus would stand until the time of the coming of the Lord, judgment, resurrection, because that's what the time of Reformation is. And boy, oh boy, I got to tell you, I've been going round and round and round with some folks on YouTube the last several days. I don't know if you may have had any opportunity to go over there, but there are a group of people on there, 5 or 6 of them in number, I think, and some of them are just outright Torah observant followers. Okay. And they are just frustrated out of their mind, as well as some others that are pretty clearly Sabbatarians, because every time they see the term law, they think it refers to the Decalogue. And I mean, this is, which is such a naive, and I use the term kindly, I don't mean it disparagingly or in any kind of an insulting manner, but it is an ignorant kind of statement, because the Bible uses the term law to refer not only to Torah, but to refer to the gospel as well. And so, I had people today accusing me of saying, well, Don, you don't believe there's any law at all today. And so you've got to wind up in the universalist camp like Max King did. I said, well, what I want you to do is show me a quote from any of my writings anywhere where I've said we're not under any kind of law at all today.
Yeah.
Just copy and paste it.
You have enough writings.
Yeah, I believe there's plenty of type out there for them to find it if I've ever said it, which I haven't. Yeah. And of course, unfortunately, there are a few of these individuals that have no qualms whatsoever about blatantly misrepresenting what I have written and what I have said.
Yeah. Well, we're under law to Christ. I mean, it's plain as day. And I don't, I mean, even Jesus said the two greatest commandments, that Paul reiterated in Romans that fulfill the law, loving God and loving your neighbor as yourself. So I don't see how anybody would say that we're not under law not under law in the sense under is in bondage, but that we follow law in some way,
Well, as I pointed out, these particular individuals, one of them was appealing to Romans chapter 4:15 and following, where there is no law, there is no transgression. Okay, that's all fine and good. But as I pointed out, they're misusing that text. They were saying where there is no law, there's no sin. I said, that's fine. How then do you explain the fact that death reigned from Adam to Moses?
Yeah.
Well, where did death come from? A violation of law. Not the law, but it came from violation of law. What law? The law of the heart of God. That's the only way you can explain that. That God planted an awareness of right and wrong, as one philosopher years and years and years ago called it, the spark of divinity in mankind, that says we innately know as human beings, murder is wrong, theft is wrong. Now, there may be all sorts of subsets to that, where one culture thinks it's perfectly fine to go kill somebody in another tribe, but you don't kill your wife or your kids or your husband or what have you, because that's wrong. Right. So anyway, we have all of this, and these people, they're so desperate to find a fault with covenant eschatology that they wind up making all sorts of false accusations about what preterists, and specifically me, what we teach. They invariably wind up involving themselves in horrific self-contradictions. What one guy in particular, I had appealed to Luke 21 and verse 22. These be the days of vengeance in which all things that are written must be fulfilled. And I referenced that in regard to my review and response to Steve Gregg's book, Why Not AD 70? The video was shown last Friday. And so this guy says, well, Steve Gregg got it right. Steve Gregg pointed out that what Jesus had in mind was that all Old Testament prophecy would be fulfilled by AD 70. But that does not include, the prophecies of the resurrection of the New Testament. It doesn't include the book of Revelation, because the Revelation had not been written when Jesus uttered those words. So I pointed out, and I've repeated the argument no less than 5 times now. I've copied and pasted it no less than 5 times on my YouTube channel there, because he keeps posting insults. So I just keep reminding him, okay, you said, I won't call his name, but you said all Old Testament prophecy was fulfilled by AD 70. But the Old Testament foretold the judgment, the resurrection, the second coming, the new creation, the kingdom, etc. Therefore, all prophecies concerning coming the Lord, judgment, resurrection, new creation, kingdom, etc., were fulfilled by AD 70. Well, obviously, he cannot touch that argument without completely surrendering his futurist eschatology. I mean, he's literally given the farm away.
Yeah.
And so he's changed the subject to the issue of the passing of the law, or this or that or the other. And I've answered that. And I said, oh, by the way, you still haven't answered this. So answer the question. Do not fail to answer it. Well, 5 times he's failed to answer it. He may wind up getting blocked, is what may wind up doing, because he's getting increasingly desperate and increasingly more angry and increasingly more acerbic in his responses. So
Yeah.
I don't know how much longer I'm going to tolerate his attitude on there. Okay, back then to this concept of the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. Now, keep in mind, as we've already pointed out, folks, Jesus standing in the temple, just like Stephen standing in the temple, Jesus said, fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Behold, I send to you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you shall kill, some of them you shall crucify, and chase from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood of all the righteous, from righteous Abel unto Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all of these things will come upon this generation. Now, here's what this means. To bring this directly back to our subject of the Messianic temple, Isaiah 65:25 foretold that in this new creation, they will not hurt nor destroy in all of my holy mountain. That's the Messianic temple. Okay? So in Isaiah 65, we have the promise of the Messianic temple. We also find the promise that Israel was going to fill up the measure of their sin. And as we shall see, for filling up that measure of sin, Israel was going to be destroyed. Isaiah 65:13 and following, the Lord God will slay you and call his people by a new name. And from that destruction would come the new creation and the Messianic temple. And here is Jesus standing in the old covenant temple, saying to the Jews that he had just said, you bear witness to yourselves that you are the sons of those who killed the prophets. For you say, well, if we had been alive in the days of our fathers, we would not have slain the prophets. But you are those who adorn the sepulchres of the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. So Jesus is calling on that very theme, the theme iterated by Isaiah 65 of filling up the measure of sin. And he posits that for his generation in the sending of his apostles and prophets, in the killing of all of them, and saying that upon them would come all of the righteous blood from our righteous Abel onward. By the way, a little bit of a diversion, but not all that much. Daniel, how many times have you heard the argument, well, you know, you preterists are just silly. The judgment of AD 70, that was a localized judgment. But Acts chapter 17 is the judgment of the world. It's universal judgment.
Right. Yeah.
So how many times have you heard that?
That's one of the main passages to answer preterism that I've heard. Acts 17, 30, and 31. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, go ahead.
Oh, what were you going to say? Did you want me to give a response to it, or?
Well, I asked you to comment on Matthew chapter 23 as an explanation and a refutation for that argument. You know where I'm going with it?
I don't see where you're going. Where are you going with it?
Oh, okay. The argument is being given.
I usually use Luke 21 and talking about the men fainting from fear and the expectation of things which are coming upon the whole world. You know.
Yes, and the nations being in fear and perplexity. Yes, I understand.
Yeah, that's usually where I go. So what do you do? What do you do in Matthew 23?
I asked a question. Were there any Jews around in the days of Abel?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Well, since all of the blood of all of the righteous from Abel onward was going to be avenged in that generation, that's the judgment of Abel onward, and that's the judgment of the persecutors of Adam onward. That's not a local judgment, folks.
No.
That is a, quote, universal judgment. By the way, we can go to Matthew 11 and Matthew chapter 12, in which Jesus said, if the works, mighty works had been done in you, had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented in sackcloth and ashes long, long ago. Same with Chorazin. Same with Sidon. But what did he say? They shall rise in judgment with this generation. Well, let's see. Jesus said in Matthew 23, judgment was coming on that generation. Well, let's see. Sodom and Gomorrah are not Jewish cities. They would have repented had the mighty works been done in Galilee, been done in them. And Tyre and Sidon were going to rise in judgment with that generation. Well, since we already know, as I just stated, since we already know Jesus said all the blood of all the righteous was going to come upon that generation, that includes the judgment of Chorazin and Sidon. Gentile cities, judgment of the nations and Israel. So to me, when people start talking about, oh, judgment of Jerusalem is strictly a localized judgment. Now, I do go to Luke chapter 21, as you do.
Oh, yeah.
That's very, very effective.
Right. Especially because it's the same author. That's one reason why I go, why I go to it is because he's switching subjects from one chapter to the other, Yeah, the
exactly.
Judgment of the whole world, judgment of the whole world. It makes sense.
But, yeah. But to me, when you talk about the judgment of all the blood of all the righteous, all the way back to Abel,
yeah,
and you bring in Tyre, Sidon, Chorazin, etc., that makes it all that much more effective.
Oh, for sure.
I can tell you, I've even used this in some formal public debates, and the effect of it has just been stunning. I mean, it really has.
I was you were talking about that passage in Isaiah 65:7 about martyr vindication. Mm-hmm. And you talked about how nobody in the dispensational commentaries or GK Bill, these others, point out that connection. Mm-hmm. And I was just curious because when I first became preterist, fall of 2015, one of the first things I did was write a commentary on Isaiah 65 and 66. And I sent it to you.
Yes.
And I don't know if you ever were able to read it. I don't even think I was much on your radar at that point. I think you knew about me, and we were working on the death book, but I don't remember you ever responding to that email about the Isaiah 65, 66 commentary. I don't remember. You might have, but it was about 14,000 words long, according to this. This is my thoughts on Isaiah 65:7. I say, I will stay silent on this for now and allow God to talk. And I quote Matthew 23, 23 to 29, 1 Thessalonians 2, 14 to 16, Colossians 1, 24 to 29, and Revelation 11, 8. And then I just move on to the next passage.
Good enough.
So I was patting myself on the back.
There you go. Well, I mean, listen, some of these thoughts, I've shared with you that years and years and years ago, before I knew the term preterist, I had no earthly idea. I mean, I could see a train coming. I was concerned, but I was also excited. I can tell you, I was genuinely excited about what I was learning from God's word every single day.
Yes.
And I wrote this paper on New Heaven, New Earth. And I shared it at a preacher study day in Chickasha, Oklahoma. And as a result of that study day, I gave out like 100 copies of it. It was about 50, 60 pages long, something like that. But pardon me, when I saw how foundational Isaiah 65, 66 was and is to the New Testament doctrine of the new heaven and new earth, and I saw how explicit explicitly, Isaiah 65 and 66, posited the new creation coming at the time of the destruction of old covenant Israel. It's like, wow, whoa. I mean, there's something wrong with something wrong with my eschatology here.
Yeah.
Unless I can find some way to divorce the New Testament references to the new heaven and new earth from Isaiah 65 and 66, or unless I can show that the New Testament writers are radically redefining the context and the motifs from Isaiah 65, 66, then I'm going to have to rethink my entire position on these passages in the New Testament. And my problem was when it came to 2 Peter chapter 3, and Peter says, according to his promise, we look for a new heaven, new earth wherein dwells righteousness. And I'm going, okay, wait a minute. Here's Peter telling us he was looking for what Isaiah foretold. So if Isaiah foretold a new creation coming at the destruction of old covenant Israel, which means, by the way, a new temple, okay, which meant the destruction of the old temple. So if Peter's telling us he's looking for what Isaiah predicted, then if Peter is talking about the dissolution of material creation, that's not what Isaiah was predicting. So what I'm doing in my hermeneutic, trying to justify my traditionalism, I'm saying, well, yeah, Peter is quoting from Isaiah, and I know he said he was looking for what was promised, but not really. Not really. He's just using the language, as I heard one man say in a formal debate that I had with him here in Ardmore, Oklahoma in 1991. Peter's just using the language accommodatively. What in the world does that mean? Well, it means I'm trapped. I don't know how to get out of it. So I'm going to use a big word that says Peter's changing the meaning without me saying Peter's changing the meaning.
Yeah.
And that's what it amounted to.
Right.
So that was my hermeneutical crisis when I was dealing with Isaiah 65, 66, and obviously in that paper that you wrote as well.
Yeah. I thought that Isaiah 65 and 66 was the church. And so that's why I was writing the commentary on it to try to work that out for myself instead of just, hearing that from people. So I worked through the chapter, and as I was drawing connections to the New Testament throughout, and then I hit that passage in 66, their bones will flourish. I said, oh, resurrection. And so I was super excited about it. That's why, because I saw how important it was, because I was also still trying to work out 2 Peter 3 when I wrote it. I was just struggling through there. So, but it's interesting how, great minds think alike, and ours,
of course, yes.
and ours do too.
Yeah, even ours.
Yeah, even ours might too.
Yeah. Well, okay. I hope everyone caught the point that I made a moment ago. That when the Lord is predicting in Isaiah 65 a new heaven and new earth and a new Jerusalem, He is there by predicting a new temple.
Yeah.
You're not going to destroy heaven and earth. You're not going to destroy Jerusalem without destroying the temple. So if you've got a new heaven and new earth, if you've got a new Jerusalem, you've got a new temple.
Yes, and that's why it's good to read First Peter before you jump all the way to 2 Peter 3, because he establishes that fairly clearly. He references Isaiah chapter 40 in the opening chapter, all flesh is like grass and whatnot, which is about, of course, Isaiah 40, the ministry of John the Baptist as a forerunner to Jesus, and setting up this new messianic temple, and this new covenant. So then when you get to chapter 2, and he talks about them as spiritual stones, and then he says in chapter 4, the end of all things is at hand, he is giving you the new heavens and new earth, a theology that he articulates in 2 Peter 3, if you have eyes to see. That's what he's reminding them of a little bit more explicitly in 2 Peter chapter 3. Because like you said, it's all talking about the new messianic temple, which is cloaked in the language of a new heavens and new earth, you know.
Absolutely. And we can't forget that in 1 Peter chapter 5, 9 and 10, Paul told his audience to rejoice in the sufferings that they were enduring, because that same suffering was being filled up in their brethren throughout the world.
Yeah.
It's epiteleo in the Greek. And here is Peter, who begins the book on the subject of suffering. And you only have to suffer for a little while until the revelation of Jesus Christ to bring their salvation. Okay. He continues that theme of suffering throughout the entirety of the book. And he closes that book with the exhortation of saying, essentially, okay, guys, you're suffering. You only have to suffer for a little while longer. But remember, your brethren throughout the world are experiencing the same thing, and all of this suffering is filling up the measure. So what did that say implicitly? Well, implicitly it said, oh, well, the end of all things is at hand. Yeah. The time has come for the judgment to begin at the house of God. Christ is ready to judge the living and the dead. That's what it implicitly said, even though he had explicitly said those things in chapter 4. And so when he reminds them that their suffering was filling up the measure, as you just pointed out, it brings to mind Isaiah 65. The new creation is about to come. Well, Isaiah 65, the new creation would come when Israel filled the measure of their sin and was destroyed. A new people were created with a new name. Well, who is Peter writing to? Well, he's writing to the diaspora. I don't know about you, Daniel, but I was raised being taught that 1 Peter was actually written to Gentiles.
Yes, I was taught that it was written to spiritual Israel.
Yes.
So the Gentile Christians that were spread abroad. Yeah.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I did a video series of, I think, 19 lessons on 1 Peter. They're available from my website for both download and purchase. But as I went through the literature, I mean, some of the finest commentators that I've got, and I even bought 8 or 10 brand new commentaries that I did not have so that I could do my research. Virtually every single one of them took the position that you just stated. It is the consensus opinion. Peter is actually writing to Gentiles, referring to them as Israel.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's going to work. And I give my reasons for that in that video series.
Yeah,
I encourage you.
People do the same thing with James as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Identical.
But to me, if you look at, Peter being the apostle to the circumcision and Paul to the uncircumcision, that's point number one right there for me as to why he would be writing to scattered Israel. But,
Yeah. Well, I agree. And that was always quite an eye-opening thing for me to realize that Peter was writing. And he says so in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1, to the diaspora.
Right.
Well, that was a technical term, even in the first century, for the 10 northern tribes that were scattered throughout all the nations. And he says, 1 Peter chapter 2, 12 and 13, have your conversation honest among the Gentiles among whom you dwell.
Yeah.
That's a direct citation of Hosea chapter 8 and verse 18. Israel is swallowed up. Israel is swallowed up by the nations. Yeah. They dwell among the nations. And that same statement is found again in Hosea chapter 9. I think it's verse 17. I've forgotten exactly which one, but somewhere along in there. So twice in Hosea, the 10 northern tribes are referred to as the dispersed, dwelling among the nations. Here is Peter quoting from Hosea over and over and over again and saying, you dwell among the nations. Yeah. How do we miss things like this? So this whole concept, folks, of filling the measure of sin. Now, very, very quickly in the little bit of time that we've got left here, let's not forget that this concept of filling in the measure of sin is carried through in almost every single book of the New Testament. Maybe not every one of them, but, I guess Philemon doesn't develop the idea of martyrdom very much. but it certainly
You
implies
could say every author.
every author. There you go.
Yeah.
But this whole theme is so dominant in the New Testament. And here's the tragedy: when you were raised believing, as I was, as Daniel was, that God was through with Israel in the first century, even if it wasn't at the cross, Daniel was given some, a little bit of leeway in that. But even if you were raised believing, but nonetheless, I was raised very firmly being taught when I was in preacher school, the law of Moses was nailed to the cross. God was through with Israel at the cross. As I pointed out to a couple of individuals on YouTube today, some of my objectors, if God was through with Israel at the cross, and if the law of Moses was nailed to the cross, then how can you say, or how can you explain the fact that Paul said his doctrine of the resurrection was nothing but what was promised in Moses, the law, and the prophets? Acts 24, 14, and 15. Acts 26. I mean, you got to explain that. Yeah. Paul said his hope of the resurrection was the hope to which our 12 tribes hope to attain. Well, where did Israel, the 12 tribes, get their hope of the resurrection? It wasn't from Romans. It wasn't from 1 Corinthians 15 or 2 Corinthians 5.
Yep.
The 12. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say thanks to Jack Scott for coming up with that when he was swimming in the pool.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. That's if the question to ask is your eschatological hope the hope of Israel? No, it's the hope of the church. Oh, so your hope isn't the same hope that Paul had, because that's what he said he was in prison for in Acts. Yeah. Like you said, well, you mentioned all of them, but the whole time he was being tried, several different occasions, and then in Acts chapter 28 as well, he was in chains for the hope of Israel.
I posed that question to Bill Lockwood.
Yeah.
In our debate at Marlow, Oklahoma, and I developed that question. I posed it to Jack and William, and I think David Wilson. Yeah. We were all in a swimming pool at the hotel, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, "Hey guys, I got a question for you."
Oh yeah.
And when I asked it, they were all going, "Okay, that's it. That's it right there." And when I posed it, Bill Lockwood did not have an answer then, and he did not have an answer at our next debate, and he still doesn't have an answer for it today, I might add. No amillennialist or no postmillennialist who says that God was through with Israel, God was through with the old covenant at the cross, has an answer for that question that can conform to the biblical truth. The minute you say, well, yeah, God was through with Israel at the cross, God was through with the old law at the cross, but I'm looking for the resurrection of Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2.
Right.
Well, then God's not through with Israel, and he's not through with the old covenant. Sorry, that's just all there is to it. So this brings us back. Here is Isaiah predicting the time of the salvation of the remnant, the time of God calling Israel and Israel turning their back on God, and the calling of the Gentiles, all of which Paul quotes and applies to his ministry and to the first century generation. Now, here is Isaiah predicting the time of Israel filling up the measure of their sin. And here's Jesus in Matthew, in Luke, Paul in Thessalonians, Peter in 1 Peter, John in Revelation, all discussing the filling up of the measure of sin in their generation and judgment falling on Israel in that generation. I mean, we've just got testimony everywhere, but keep in mind, this whole concept of filling up the measure of the sin would lead to the judgment of Israel, the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the land, the destruction of the temple, the destruction of the city. Therefore, the necessity for the Messianic temple. And folks, we're out of time. I want to thank you for joining us here on Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. Daniel, you have a good evening.
You
Great
too.
to be with you.
Stay with me though when you get off. When we cut to live stream.
Okay.
Okay.
Do I just hit leave?
Oh no, don't leave. Don't leave. All right.